Hello, Alex Zane here with Movie Dose on Cinema Surgery, your weekly roundup of all the biggest stories doing the rounds in Movie Land over the last 7 days. But today we are talking about one story alone, everything we know and think about the upcoming James Gunn Superman movie, because a lot of brand new intel was released this week online. James Gunn revealing new information about the movie. As well as that, obviously, that trailer landed. We're going to be talking through all of that and giving our opinion on the trailer itself on this episode. As always, if you have any thoughts on anything we talk about on Movie Dose, just hit us up in the comments below. And if you do like this video, as I always ask, please do hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so we can keep making more of these. Right, let's get into this. We'll start with the first synopsis we got this week for James Gunn's Superman. James Gunn takes on the original superhero in the newly imagined DC universe with a singular blend of epic action, humor, and heart, delivering a Superman who's driven by compassion and an inherent belief in the goodness of humankind. So not loads to go on there in terms of plot, but there are some very, very key words to pull out of that. The language used in that synopsis is very interesting. Humor, heart, compassion, goodness. Now, James Gunn, to me, is a filmmaker who has this rare gift of being able to balance frothy fun and real darkness, often in the same film. I mean, you need only look at Guardians of the Galaxy 3 or The Suicide Squad to see that light and shade sharing the screen, often from scene to scene. But this synopsis seems to suggest, with its use of language, we are getting a warm and optimistic Superman, possibly bereft of the darkness in the Suicide Squad and Guardians. And I think that is a good thing for two reasons. Reason number one. So, without wanting to get too bleak, especially at this time of year, the world is a divided place right now. One need only spend a matter of minutes on X to see an undercurrent, nay, a current of anger bubbling away. Now, I know Superman is still just a movie and it's not going to change the planet, but perhaps what the world really needs right now is an optimistic Superman movie, and to use the quote from the synopsis, with an inherent belief in the goodness of humankind. Now, let's remember that when Superman was created back in the 1930s, he became a beacon of hope for people during the dark times of the Great Depression and World War II, providing the readers of the comic with optimism. So, yes, I think perhaps now, of all times, is the right time to have a warm, positive, uplifting, optimistic Superman. Reason number two, this is much simpler, quite literally, it differentiates this Superman from the Superman we've seen on screen recently in Zack Snyder's films, Man of Steel, Batman vs. Superman, The Justice League. We had a much darker tone. So we're getting a new Superman, we're getting a new tone, one that potentially makes this movie closer to the original Richard Donner, Christopher Reeve films in terms of its warmth. Now, while I've highlighted the heart and the compassion, if that all is starting to sound a little too saccharine, remember the other word I mentioned, humor. Now, I love James Gunn's sense of humor. It's anarchic, it's surreal, it's one of the reasons I go and see James Gunn movies. However, there was a press day on set earlier this year, back in June, and James Gunn was talking a lot about the movie. Now, because of the trailer being released this week, the embargo on a lot, not all, but a lot of that press has been lifted. And so we have got some brand new quotes this week from James Gunn. And one of those quotes is him talking about the level of humor in his Superman film. He says, it's humorous, but certainly not as comedic as either Suicide Squad or Guardians. There's plenty of humor in it. People like Rachel Brosnahan, who plays Lois Lane, are so funny. And David Corenswet, who plays Superman, is very funny as well. So there's humor in it, but it's trying to create something that is grounded. Now, I'm going to be honest. When I heard that quote, I was disappointed. Now, I know a lot of people, when it was first announced that James Gunn was going to be writing and directing the new Superman movie, were worried that he was going to bring too much of his brand of humor to this Superman movie, something that is not normally associated with a Superman movie. But like I said, being a fan of James Gunn's sense of humor, I was hoping to see that arch comedy, that anarchic surrealism in a Superman movie for the first time. But I have given this some thought, and the more I think about it, the more I don't know how that level of humor would work in a Superman movie, especially with James Gunn using that word, trying to create something that is more grounded. So I have come round to the idea of this not being as funny as I might have been inclined to want. Because look, that word again, grounded. You take something like Guardians of the Galaxy, a world of Zargnuts and floating space skulls. It's already so heightened. It lends itself to comedy madness. But this, again, that word that James Gunn used, grounded, means that the humor is clearly going to have to be pulled back. He also said on this subject, it's fantasy. It's taking from other things like Game of Thrones, where it's this universe where superheroes actually exist, what they're like. There's a magic there that's undeniable. So let's deal with that Game of Thrones reference first. Now, that is James Gunn talking about how his DC universe is inspired as much by fantasy as it is by sci-fi. So that's the Game of Thrones reference. Now let's focus on the more interesting bit, where he is creating a world in which superheroes actually exist. If James Gunn is world building that place and wants to bring an audience in and have them accept that superheroes exist in his universe, then that anarchic, surreal, but most importantly, self-referential humor that we've known and loved him for before, it can't be there to the same extent, because it will simply undercut the whole world building experience and have us questioning the authenticity of this world if the people in it are constantly being too self-referential. So basically, from going, what? I'm not getting the James Gunn humor I want, I have come around now to go, yeah, all right. No, I get it. I get it. And look, ultimately, it is still James Gunn. So even a dialed down James Gunn, humor-wise, I think we could still be looking at the funniest Superman movie we've got yet. And while we're on the subject of talking about how this Superman movie is different from previous Superman movies, let's talk about that title change. Because when the movie was initially announced, it was called Superman Legacy. Then earlier this year, that got shortened to just Superman. Now, just this week, we got a brand new quote released from that same press day when the embargo lifted, with James Gunn talking about that title change. I thought maybe the title had a looking back feeling about it, and this isn't about looking back. This is about looking forward. So although when you see the movie, you'll understand where Legacy comes from, because it's about Clark and his relationship to his Kryptonian parents and his relationship to his human parents, and whose legacy is he really. So it's about that. But I think the title felt a little too looking back. So this one makes absolutely perfect sense to me. This Superman is the movie that is basically going to launch James Gunn and Peter Safran's DC universe. So if there is a word in the title that it might make the casual moviegoer think this is tied to a previous movie, a previous franchise, then simply excise that word, which is what they've done. I mean, we were talking about a similar thing only a couple of weeks ago with potentially last Mission Impossible movie changing its title from Dead Reckoning Part 2 to The Final Reckoning. In terms of that being a great decision, just in case someone went, I didn't see Part 1, so I'm not going to go and see Part 2. The Final Reckoning, I might never see Tom Cruise's Ethan Hunt again. I'll definitely go and see that. This, to a lesser extent, works in the same way by getting rid of the word legacy. Because look, let's be completely honest, while some people love them, Superman hasn't had the best of times on the big screen recently. Joss Whedon's Justice League, Batman versus Superman, the theatrical version. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I maintain that Batman versus Superman, the Ultimate Edition, is a good film, but nevertheless ensuring that a casual moviegoer doesn't believe this brand new Superman is tied in some way to the legacy of those films is key. So that is a good decision to remove legacy from the title. And James Gunn has also said he is making a standalone movie. This is a brand new quote that came out this week about why James Gunn feels it's important that he is making a standalone movie. Everything needs to stand by itself. I don't want somebody to have to go and see this movie and be relying on anything else. Now, listen, once we get down the line, that may change a little bit. Are seeds being planted? Yes, there's seeds being planted, but that is never going to be the predominant thing in any scene for me. And then perhaps more succinctly, he said, if something's there just to set up something else, F it. Now, this seems to be James Gunn's modus operandi for every DCU movie going forward. These are going to be standalone films, which sounds fan-bloody-tastic to me and should be music to the ears of anyone who is tired of MCU post-credit sequence like that mad one at the end of Eternals with Harry Styles that have still not gone anywhere. And if my maths is correct, and I did the working out just before this episode, I think that Harry Styles one is one of 18 mid or post-credit sequences in the MCU that have literally not yet, let's give them the benefit of the doubt, not yet led anywhere. So this whole thing of a standalone movie and MCU style post-credit sequences not being something that are going to be prevalent in the DCU. Gunn had this to say. We're world building, we're not story building. We're not writing one story that has a beginning, middle, and end. We're creating a universe in which people can go and join into this universe and experience it. It's much more like Star Wars than Marvel in that respect. The only thing we do know is that the events of Superman will influence the plot of James Gunn's own Peacemaker TV series, Season 2. And James Gunn did also say that there may be one or two things at the end of Superman that might tease towards the future. But then in the same breath, he said they might get cut. So TBC on that one. But while James Gunn is clearly talking about looking forward with this movie, starting a new era of the DCU, and that's why he lost the word legacy, he did reveal this week some of what inspired him from Superman's past when it came to making his Superman. Now, he referenced how the Christopher Reeve movies inspired him, but he also made a point of how he took some inspiration from Zack Snyder's version of Superman. Now, there is a cynical way of looking at this, which is in saying that it could be there just to appease the Snyder fans who are still upset that Henry Cavill was excised from the role of Superman, that They'll never get their Man of Steel 2 or their Justice League trilogy. But in the same breath, James Gunn didn't have to say anything. And so to have him not ignore Zack Snyder's work and reference it, if it is if nothing else, a kind gesture. He also revealed what his biggest inspiration for his Superman was. It is All-Star Superman. That influenced me more than anything. So All-Star Superman is a comic book series from the mid-noughties that was turned into an animated film in 2011. What's really interesting about this is the series started with writer Grant Morrison's desire to tell a timeless Superman story that wasn't an origin story. So this seems like the perfect time to talk about the fact that James Gunn's Superman is not an origin story. This is a fact we've known for quite a while, but this week we got a little bit more intel on his plans for his Superman. This is what he had to say. We just start in the middle of the action. Superman already exists. Lois and Clark already know each other. Lex hates Superman's guts from the beginning, although they don't know each other personally. So we start right in the middle of the action. Okay, so first things first, I think it's an incredibly smart move, one of the smartest moves this movie has made, to not be an origin story. I mean, look, the origin stories of Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, these have transcended movie fandom and become part of pop culture lore. We know these stories. I mean, look, when The Amazing Spider-Man came out, 5 years after the end of Sam Raimi's tenure as director, and we got the origin story again. How frustrating was that to watch the same story being told again? I mean, in Batman versus Superman, where we flash back to Bruce Wayne's parents being killed in the alley, and you just like, no, it's well shot, but I know this story. So the fact that we are not going to be getting a baby crash landing on Earth, the Superman backstory, I think is a great thing. I think it's exciting because, we're walking into a movie and we're like, I don't know what's going to happen. It's new. It's exciting. That's what you want from a movie-going experience. So yes, a great thing that it's not an origin story. But let's break down that quote in a little more detail, because James Gunn did say we start in the middle of the action. Now, some movie outlets have taken that to mean that we start in the middle of an action sequence. I think that might be a little bit of a leap. I think it could be read as James Gunn just saying, no, we start in the middle of the action in terms of all these relationships have already been established, not we're literally starting in the middle of an action set piece. And yeah, I'd still put a bit of money on that being the case, because look, I think really an audience also wants to see what a Superman movie made with the very latest movie technology looks like. And so if you open up by showing people exactly what they can expect action-wise from a new Superman, that makes sense to me. And actually, on the subject of some of the inspiration James Gunn took from a particular movie when it came to shooting the action in this movie, in his own Superman, he had this to say. Being able to shoot stuff in the sky is really hard. So we took a lot from films like Top Gun Maverick. We shoot a lot of our action with actual drones flying in and around Superman and the people he's flying with, the engineer and whoever else that he's fighting up in the air. And we did that on sound stages. We got these really small, crazy drones. We got some of the best flyers in the world who are here working on it. So the engineer mentioned there, played by Maria Gabriela de Faria, is a DC character making her big screen debut in this film, which features a number of lesser known or lesser seen DC characters, including Nathan Fillion as Guy Gardner, Isabella Merced as Hawkgirl, and Eddie Gathegi as Mr. Terrific, who, by the sounds of things, of all those characters, has the biggest role to play. But Gunn said this about them: I love Mr. Terrific. These characters all get their moment in the sun. They're not just cameos. These are characters. They're the supporting cast, but Mr. Terrific is the main character of those characters. He actually has a big part of the plot, and so that was fun. Right, let's go back to that initial quote and what James Gunn also said. He said, Lois and Clark already know each other. So David Corenswet is obviously Clark Kent, and Rachel Brosnahan is obviously playing Lois Lane. Now, James Gunn, again, this just came out this week. He talked about how he was drawn to both of them for those roles as individuals, but it was only when they did the chemistry read together to make sure they'd work on screen together that he really realized what he had on his hands. He said it was something magic and one of his greatest moments in filmmaking. Now, James Gunn, A, doesn't always do chemistry reads, and B, the number and caliber of stars that he has worked with for this to be one of his greatest moments in filmmaking, well, that is exciting. And he went on to say, when he saw them working together actually on set, once they'd been cast, I don't think it's something we've ever seen in any superhero movie ever. He went on to talk about how this Lois and Clark relationship is very different to any relationship we've seen between the two on screen. There's long scenes that are about their relationship and the way they relate and what it would be like for a person who is this incredibly intelligent, strong-headed, stubborn, skeptical journalist to have a relationship with someone who can lift a skyscraper. Now, obviously, someone on this press day was doing their due diligence, and they did ask the question as to whether Lois knew that Clark was Superman. To this, James Gunn was a little more cagey, saying, well, we'll see. She knows who Superman is. And so the final part of the quote we need to examine. Lex hates Superman's guts from the beginning, although they don't know each other personally. So Nicholas Hoult is playing Lex Luthor. He was originally in the frame for Superman himself, but he seems very happy with the fact that he was cast as Lex Luthor, saying, I think there was something in my instinct when I first read the script where I was like, I think that's more what I should be doing in this story. We actually got some more, if slightly limited, information from James Gunn revealed this week about how he sees Lex Luthor, because he described him as a sorcerer, which potentially raised a few eyebrows because you're like, I thought he was a scientist, not a sorcerer. But he clarified, because once again, he talked about his biggest inspiration for his Superman movie. All-Star Superman influenced me more than anything. Being able to take that sort of Silver Age feel, that sort of science fiction approach to it with gadgets. Lex is really sort of a sorcerer in a way. He's a scientist, but he's so good at science that I think of him as a sorcerer. So, yeah, still a scientist, not an actual sorcerer. Everyone relax. So I'm a huge fan of Nicholas Hoult as an actor, and I really hope we get a great Lex Luthor in this movie. And weirdly, getting Lex Luthor right seems to be one of the major points of discourse online regarding the new Superman movie. I'll read you a couple of comments that I found. I really hope they nail Lex in this movie, make him a little more likable than the animated show, but also hitting the note that he hates Superman powerfully right on the head. I would love to see him played as someone who is an amazing philanthropist, but whose blind hatred of Superman blinds him to the harm his efforts to get rid of Soup's causes. Also, it's friggin' disappointing that after all these years, there hasn't been a single silver screen version of Lex that has the malice, intelligence, intimidation factor, and aura of comics Lex. Lex is Superman's Joker. I really hope Gunn has looked at the comics, because they always knock it out of the park for some reason. It shouldn't be difficult to replicate for the movies. But it can be difficult to replicate for the movies, at least according to Jesse Eisenberg, who was talking this week about the negative reaction his portrayal of Lex Luthor received in Batman versus Superman. And he was talking about it in quite big terms, saying it's kind of embarrassing to admit, but I genuinely think it actually hurt my career in a real way. Then again, for me, Gene Hackman's a freaking legend, and watching Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor, I personally loved. Let's wait and see what Nicholas Hoult does with Lex Luthor, but pressure! Finally, Gunn also had this to say about the film. It takes place over a short amount of time. So let's add all those up. Starts in the middle of the action, all the relationships are already set up. Takes place over a really short amount of time. Now, that really stuck out to me when I read it, because what does a really short amount of time mean exactly? But more importantly, why did James Gunn feel the need to make that statement that it takes place over a really short amount of time? I mean, there's no way of being able to dissect that any further, but it's certainly a fascinating turn of phrase he used. All of this, though, means it sounds very different to any previous iteration of Superman we have seen. Now, a couple more bits before we get into the trailer. Music. James Gunn has said that this film will be score-led, not soundtrack-led. Now, the score for this movie is coming from John Murphy, whose previous work includes Kick-Ass, 28 Days Later. He also worked on Gunn's last two movies, The Suicide Squad and Guardians of the Galaxy 3. It's a new one for Gunn, this, though, because as we know, he's a filmmaker who is famous for his needle drops, and never more so than in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. And yet here he is saying, and this is ad verbatim, came out this week, it's much, much, much more of a score film. He clarified there will be songs, but that it's not a soundtrack in a way that his previous projects have been. Now, I'm highlighting this because, as I said earlier, although I've kind of made my peace with it, we're not getting the anarchic out there humor that I've known James Gunn for. We've known James Gunn for. I've loved James Gunn for. And now we're not going to get the needle drops that, we also know James Gunn for. I think what I'm trying to say is when you add all these little bits together, how much of a James Gunn film is this going to feel like in terms of the James Gunn we've come to expect? Now, on the one hand, you could look at it like, oh, wow, this doesn't even feel like a James Gunn movie. And that's disappointing because I go and see him for the name James Gunn. But on the other hand, which I'm more keen to believe, we are seeing the evolution of a filmmaker who is now removing some of these trademark elements that we know him for and is becoming, I don't know, a more mature filmmaker, or at least an evolved filmmaker that doesn't need to rely on certain things, tricks that he's used from his bag previously. I'm certainly hoping it's the latter. I believe it is. Also, and we'll talk about this when we come to discussing the trailer itself, I'm less worried about this being score-led. First, when they released the motion poster earlier in the week with that synth take on the John Williams iconic score, I was like, oof, that's good. But is that just for the poster? And then we got John Murphy's score across the trailer and the heavy inspiration from John Williams' original score. And my gosh, I am no longer worried about this being a score-led, not a soundtrack-led movie. Now, we got some more information this week on one of the most contentious issues that happened very early on in the process of making Superman, which was when we got the first shot of David Corenswet in costume and his trunks were on the outside. A lot of discourse online. Some loved it. A lot didn't love it. Just this week, James Gunn talking about the thinking behind this. We got some brand new information about why Superman's trunks are on the outside in his version of Superman. We screen tested with trunks and no trunks, and one of the things David said is that Superman wants kids to not be afraid of him. He's this incredibly powerful, could be considered scary individual, and he wants people to like him. So he dresses like a professional wrestler. He dresses in a way that makes people unafraid of him, and that really clicked in for me. And I think trying to pretend that Superman's costume doesn't have some frivolity to it at its base, trying to make it look serious is silly because he is a superhero. He's the first one, brightly colored, and that is who he is. So David Corenswet himself played a big part in making the decision to have the trunks on the outside. And I think that's sound logic. I think you read through that quote and there is some really, really sound logic there. Personally, I didn't mind the trunks on the outside in the first place. And the reason I didn't mind, and this is key, context. It is all about context. It's all about how the costume fits into the tone and the atmosphere of the movie a character, any character is in. I mean, look, would Danny DeVito's penguin costume have worked in the Batman? No, of course it wouldn't. Yes, I'm picking a really extreme example, but would having trunks on the outside worked for Henry Cavill's costume in Man of Steel? No, because Zack Snyder was going for a much more somber, serious tone, so it wouldn't have worked. Here, I'd say to anyone still worried about the trunk situation is once you see it in the context of the movie, then a costume. I mean, I'm not saying it will definitely work, but it will then, you'll know if it either works or doesn't work. Context is key to any costume. Also, I do like the line where he says he wears the trunks on the outside because he wants people to like him. Just a quick reminder, if you wear your pants on the outside, it won't make people like you more. It'll make them move away from you on the bus. Right, one more thing to talk about before we get into the trailer, and it's the fact that it cannot be understated just how much is riding on this movie. Because at that press day back in June, this is back in June, where James Gunn was speaking to journalists, and he seemed a little overwhelmed because he was asked how he was doing by a journalist, and he said, "I'm miserable. Really, I'm miserable, but hopefully it's for the greater good." And that greater good is the literal future of his and Peter Safran's brand new DC universe. It is all riding on this movie because there's a whole raft of other films and TV shows lined up, such as Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, a Lanterns TV series, a Bat Family movie, Brave and the Bold, and so many more. There's also very unconfirmed reports that Robert Pattinson's Batman might be joining the DCU. And of course, you've got to imagine that James Gunn and Peter Safran have had behind closed doors conversations about their Justice League, but all of that is based on the success of this one movie. I'll leave the last word to James Gunn before we talk about the trailer. He said, quite rightly, a lot is riding on Superman. I mean, we're not just going to keep making movies. So Superman could be the beginning or the beginning of the end of the DCU. But based on that trailer, it's the start of something very, very special. So I'm recording this like shortly after watching the trailer, so these thoughts are pretty new, but let's start with, wow, what a bold and brilliant way to open that trailer. So a major issue sometimes leveled at Superman is just how powerful he is. Almost too powerful. What's the threat? There's no vulnerability to him. So why not open your trailer with a battered, bruised, but also bleeding Man of Steel. What an opening. I mean, to borrow from Ben Affleck in Batman versus Superman, tell me, do you bleed? Apparently, yeah, he does. I was astonished that was the opening. I loved the opening. Okay, next up, we see some shots of David Corenswet as Clark Kent. The reason I mention this is, now look, it's never going to survive proper scrutiny, but for the first time, we've got a Clark Kent that does look markedly different to Superman himself. Again, scrutiny wouldn't stand up to it, but interesting that they have gone for a much different look for Clark this time. Then we see some familiar settings, the Daily Planet office, the Kent farm, and then we get to a bit which, and because I only watched it like half an hour ago, I'm still really careful not to make myself cry. Crypto. Oh my God. That bit where Superman whistles for Crypto and you see the plume of snow as the dog's racing towards him. Now, look, those who have followed various things that I've done, podcasts and the like, and even here on Cinema Surgery, will know that I have just this weird, I'm not alone in this, but I'm one of those people who has the most powerful reaction to animals in films. And James Gunn, as we discussed here on Movie Dose recently, to look at what he did with Rocket in Guardians 3, and the bit where Soups holds up his cape and hands it to Crypto. See, it's quite, honestly, it really messed me up. I cried my eyes out. And he goes, take me home, take me home. I was like, oh, wow. That's for me, that's the moment in the trailer. I mean, seeing Crypto at all, we all knew he was in it, but I hadn't expected to see him, and I hadn't expected to have such a powerful and visceral reaction to that dog. Now, in that scene, we do see Crypto being a very good boy. James Gunn has talked about Crypto and his relationship with Superman, saying, Superman's relationship with Crypto is complicated. He's not nearly the best dog you've seen. There's a lot more of Crypto than you see in the trailer. But yeah, I also thought it was a way to say that, yes, we're embracing all of the Superman mythology. So Crypto's presence in the trailer just once again emphasizes what James Gunn himself has said about really leaning in to this silver age of the Superman comics, which was a period from the 50s to the 60s, which were much more lighthearted. It was much more lighthearted take on Superman, which saw Crypto appear and also often saw Superman battling giant monsters. And yes, in this trailer, we do see Superman battling a giant monster. So with that in mind, and then the color palette that we see, it looks like, for all the drama that is on show in this trailer, we are still going to get a fun and James Gunn's light-hearted sensibility and humor is going to come through in this movie. So I think it looks like the most comic book Superman movie yet. Then we get a few shots of action, which look incredible. Superman saving that young girl. I was like, wow. Perhaps not as many shots of Nicholas Hoult as Lex Luthor as might have been expected, but one really powerful shot where he's got tears in his eyes watching a crowd chant Superman's name. That was effective. Then we get glimpses of the whole menagerie of other DC characters that are going to be in it. Seeing Nathan Fillion, a man that I adore, as Guy Gardner rocking that haircut, that was a high point for me. And also, I mentioned it earlier, but that score over what feels like a genuine teaser that gives you a feeling of what this movie is going to be like, a feel for how you are going to be emotionally moved by it without obviously giving any plot points away. Those two things combined it was majestic. I mean, to bring us right back to where we started with the synopsis, this trailer fully backs up that synopsis. It feels like we are going to get an uplifting Superman movie, a Superman movie that is irony and cynicism free, the Superman movie that the world needs right now. I mean, is it too much to say that a trailer actually makes you feel hope? No, it isn't, because I just watched it and I think James Gunn, he's gone all in with this. And having watched that trailer, I'm very, very, very excited for this film. And in fact, the minute I finish recording this, I'm going to go and watch Crypto Being a Good Boy again and bawl my eyes out. But enough about what I think. What did you think? Did you like the trailer? What are your thoughts on all the new information that has emerged from James Gunn's mouth this week on his movie? Are we excited about Superman? Are you excited about Superman? Or did you find the trailer lacking? Do let me know in the comments below. And that is it for this week. Once again, as always, please do like this video if you have enjoyed it and subscribe to the channel so we can keep making more of them. We are off Movie Dose next week because it's Christmas, but we will be back on January the 2nd, heading into 2025, bringing you all the latest news from Movie Land. So until then, a huge Merry Christmas from all of us here at the Cinema Surgery team. Have a great one. Have a happy new year. Look after yourselves, but have fun. And I'll see you in 2025. Bye-bye.